Before giving up, try this for just 21 more days, and your mind will create a new reality. There's a type of exhaustion that doesn't manifest in the muscles, but in the way the mind breathes. You keep functioning, answering messages, completing tasks, but inside something feels suspended, as if life were happening at too safe a distance. It's not a visible collapse. It's a silent exhaustion, difficult to explain, similar to the feeling of carrying something heavy without knowing exactly what it is. When this state persists, giving up stops seeming like weakness and starts sounding like rest. And it is precisely at this point that most real transformations are interrupted. Not because the person couldn't bear to continue, but because no one has explained what happens inside the mind when hope disappears before change appears. What will be said here is not intended to convince or motivate. It is intended to accompany that strange interval between "I can't take it anymore" and "nothing has changed yet." Because, from a psychological and neurobiological point of view, this interval is not empty. It is active, even when everything seems stagnant. The 21 days aren't about motivation, they're about crossing the psychological desert. The moment when everything seems pointless is, paradoxically, when the brain begins to change. There is a very specific point in any process of internal transformation where the brain enters into conflict with itself. Initially, novelty creates a slight impulse. Dopamine responds. There is an initial feeling of possibility, but this effect is brief. When it disappears, the nervous system enters a less visible and much more uncomfortable phase. Energy drops, enthusiasm vanishes, and apathy accompanied by emptiness arises. It is at this point that most give up, because they confuse the absence of emotional reward with the absence of progress. In depth psychology, Carl Jung described this stage as the journey through what he called the desert of individuation, a period in which old psychic structures begin to lose strength, but the new ones are not yet consolidated. In the brain, something similar happens. Old circuits, built through repetition over years, continue to fire automatically. They do not do this out of conscious resistance, but out of biological economy. The brain has been shaped to repeat what it already knows, because it consumes less energy. When you adopt a new behavior or a new way of responding emotionally, these old networks clash with still fragile circuits. This clash is felt as stagnation, as if nothing is working. The uncomfortable truth is that feeling like nothing is working is often one of the most reliable signs of neural reorganization. The brain is weakening old pathways before strengthening new ones. It's an intermediate territory. Persisting here doesn't create euphoria. It doesn't bring enthusiasm. What begins to emerge is physiological stability. The nervous system reduces extremes. Excitement disappears, but the chaos also begins to lose intensity. It's like crossing a desert without mirages. There are no false images of reward, only silence, repetition, and time. And only those who endure this silence reach the real oasis, not the imagined one. Why does your mind fight against change even when you are suffering? The brain prefers known suffering to unknown relief. It may seem paradoxical, but the repetition of painful patterns doesn't happen due to a lack of awareness or strength. It happens because the brain associates familiarity with safety. Even a negative emotional experience, when predictable, requires less activation of the alert system. That's why so many people remain in states that hurt them, not because they enjoy suffering, but because known suffering demands less vigilance. The limbic system, especially the amygdala, doesn't assess quality of life. It assesses threat. Any change that disrupts a consolidated emotional identity is registered as risk. It's not just habit that's at stake. It's the internal narrative that sustains who you believe yourself to be. Friedrich Nietzsche observed that human beings prefer pain with a known meaning to freedom without a map. Change threatens that map, and the brain reacts as if it were losing protection. When you persevere despite the discomfort, something slowly begins to happen. The amygdala reduces its sensitivity, emotional reactivity decreases. You still feel, but you react less. Not because the problems have disappeared, but because the brain learns that the new state is not fatal. It's like living in a dilapidated house that still feels safer than the world outside. Leaving is frightening, but staying exacts a silent price that grows over time. The silent mistake, trying to feel better instead of becoming more stable. Seeking quick relief sabotages profound transformation. One of the most common misconceptions on the path to emotional change is confusing well-being with regulation. Feeling good is pleasant, but it doesn't mean the nervous system is organized. The brain can generate quick relief through constant stimulation, distractions, excessive information consumption, or even superficial emotional practices. These resources momentarily elevate dopamine, but they don't restructure the deeper circuits. Dopamine acts as an invitation, not as a foundation. It motivates the beginning, but doesn't sustain the process. Emotional regulation depends much more on the balance between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. This balance doesn't arise from continuous arousal, but from silent repetition and tolerance of discomfort. Fyodor Dostoevsky described something similar when he observed that human beings often trade depth for immediate relief, even when it impoverishes them internally. The counterintuitive truth is that stability comes before meaning. Before understanding the purpose of something, the body needs to escape a state of constant threat. In about 21 days, when you stop systematically running away from discomfort, the nervous system adjusts its thresholds. What once seemed unbearable becomes merely difficult. It's like strengthening the foundation before decorating the house. The foundation isn't visible, but it supports everything that comes after. The illusion of the new reality. What really changes is the observer. The world seems different when the nervous system is no longer on alert. Many people expect transformation to come from the outside. A sign, a clear change in circumstances, a visible response. But what usually happens is more subtle. External reality remains practically the same, while perception changes profoundly. The neuroscience of perception shows that the brain does not register the world in a neutral way. It filters everything from the organism's internal state. When the nervous system is in a state of heightened alert, everything is interpreted as a threat, rejection, or loss. When this state begins to regulate itself, the same reality ceases to be perceived with such distortion. It's not the universe that responds, it's the brain that reorganizes attentional and emotional priorities. Alan Watts used to say that the problem isn't the world, but the tension with which we observe it. With the reduced state of alert, automatic interpretation loses its power. A quieter presence emerges, less urgency, less reaction, like cleaning a window pane instead of trying to change the scenery. The scene remains, but now it can be seen without excessive noise. When persistence isn't stubbornness, but psychological maturity. Giving up brings relief. Staying transforms. There is a profound exhaustion that makes any continuation seem pointless. At that point, persistence can be mistaken for compulsion, but there is an essential difference between repeating out of fear and persevering out of conscious commitment. Compulsion attempts to numb the pain. Commitment sustains even without immediate reward. Emotionally mature adults don't wait for motivation to arise before acting. They recognize its absence and still persevere. Neurobiologically, this strengthens the self-regulation circuits in the prefrontal cortex. Identity begins to reorganize itself, not around pleasure, but around coherence. Franz Kafka wrote that the true path passes through regions where no one wants to remain. But it is there that something essential is formed. It's like holding the rudder steady during a storm, not because it will stop quickly, but because something within you becomes more stable as you navigate it. The inner silence that precedes clarity. Before meaning, comes emptiness, and almost no one can bear that. There is a little discussed stage in the process of emotional reorganization where internal narratives weaken. The mind produces fewer explanations, fewer stories. This is felt as emptiness. There is no clear hope, but neither is there intense despair, just a silent space that is frightening because it offers no reference point. From a neural standpoint, networks associated with rumination and excessive anticipation enter a temporary resting phase. It's not regression, it's a pause. Sustaining this silence for about 21 days reduces baseline anxiety because the nervous system learns that it doesn't need to fill every space with thought. It's like a field after the harvest. Nothing grows there for a while, but the soil is reorganizing itself. What truly emerges after 21 days is not happiness, but autonomy. The biggest change is no longer having to run away from yourself. Over time, dependence on external stimuli diminishes. The constant need for distraction, validation, or intensity loses strength. This occurs because the strengthening of the prefrontal cortex expands the capacity for emotional self-regulation. The autonomy that emerges is not noisy. It is not accompanied by euphoria. It is silent, firm, and stable. This autonomy manifests itself in less reactive and more coherent choices, less escapism, less urgency, more presence. It's like stepping out of the current and finally standing on your own ground. The world doesn't magically transform, but you're no longer swept away by it in the same way. Perhaps the new reality isn't something that appears outside. Perhaps it's simply the ability to remain within oneself without needing to escape. And from a psychological, neurological, and existential point of view, that changes everything that truly matters.